So, in this recording on C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces, I'm going to speak briefly about Psyche and specifically the faith of Psyche. So, we just want to look at and see how faith and reason sort of interact in Psyche. Now, um, Psyche would Psyche I think would correspond more with her approach to faith and reason corresponds more with the priest of Unjit, okay, um, as opposed to the fox. And so the priest of Unjit, I've said, represents a faith exemplified, right? So faith for the priest of Unjit um, is so primary, it's what anchors all things. So remember, the priest of Undred makes it clear that, yeah, he is aware of Greek philosophy. He says it's subtle, but basically says it brings no corn, no rain. He said it doesn't prepare you for death. And then he says, besides, he says that the Greek philosophy doesn't understand holy things. Okay? And so Psyche is, I think, would belong more to the perspective of the priest of Unjin, right, as opposed to the perspective of the fox. Psyche, like Orwell, believes in the gods, but more importantly, it's not just that she believes in God, she believes in the nature, okay, of the gods. So that means that she recognizes first and foremost, like the priest of Undred, that when you speak about the gods, you're speaking about holy things. Okay, that means that the rules all of a sudden don't really matter. The way you'd speak of natural things with logical precision doesn't really matter when you come to speak about the gods. So as I mentioned, when the priest of Undred confronted the fox, he made it clear. Look, the gods are they're unclear. It's like dealing with, instead of dealing with thin water, it's like dealing with thick blood, right? They sort of weave in and out of each other. You can't really pin them down. It's hard to figure out just that world. And so Psyche is more like this. So she believes in the gods, but believes in the nature of the gods. That first of all, you're dealing with holy things. These are sacred things, and they don't follow the same sort of logic. So she's more willing then to accept statements and ideas that may seem contradictory, understanding that in the world of the gods, these things appear that way to us. Now, so I want to look at a couple of places where we see this with Psyche. So in chapter 7, chapter 7 is when Psyche is being prepared for her sacrifice. So she is going to be sacrificed because she imitated Unjit, and Unjit is upset. And so she's meant to be tied to a tree on a mountain, and the shadow brute is going to devour her. And she is also to be the bride of the shadow brute, right? So this is one of the contradictions, is that the shadow brute is to devour and marry her, right? And of course, the fox says this doesn't make sense. You can't have her for supper and then marry her, right? That doesn't. But the priest of Undred and Psyche think this is perfectly fine, right? Because this sounds like a contradiction to her, but Psyche is perfectly fine with that. Now, so this is when Orwell visits Psyche. And Orwell's trying to persuade Psyche and so wake her up to see how dangerous the situation is and she's going to die. And Psyche is not afraid at all. Okay, and so on page 70, she says, no, she's not going to be afraid. But she first reveals a doubt that she has on page 7. She says, no, she's afraid. She says only of one thing. There's a cold doubt, a horrid shadow in some corner of my soul. So she acknowledges that she does have a little bit of doubt. Supposing Supposing how if there were no God of the mountain, and even no holy shadow brood, and those who are tied to the tree only die day by day from thirst and hunger and wind and sun, or are eaten piecemeal by the crows of catamountains. And it is this, O Maya, and then she breaks down crying, right? So she has this moment of doubt, but then a couple of paragraphs later, she says, Orwell says, she recovered before I did. She raised her head queen-like again and said, but I will not believe it. Right? So she makes it resorts to um, her belief in the gods and her faith in them. She says, the priest has been with me. Right, so she's talked with the priest again, so you can see she's spent most of her life with the fox. In fact, all of her life with the fox. So she's gotten the benefit of the fox's Greek wisdom. So she's been with the priest recently. And she says, the priest has been with me. I never knew him before. He is not what the fox thinks. Right, so in this case, you can see she's saying that the fox is has gotten something wrong, okay, about the priest, right? So it's this Greek philosophy saying, or this dominance of reason to the fact that it's, to the extent that it suppresses faith. It's like that view. There's something wrong there. It hasn't. It doesn't really have the whole story. So she says, it's not. He is not what the fox thinks. Do you know, sister? I have come to feel more and more that the fox hasn't the whole truth, right? So the fox hasn't the whole truth, right? Again, the fox represents Greek wisdom, Greek philosophy. All right, and so she's saying, I've come to realize that he doesn't have the entire truth. All right, and she says he has much of it, so she has respect for the truth that the fox has given her. So she recognizes and respects, okay, the fox's truth. Right, so she's not diminishing the role of reason, the role of the philosophy, right? But she's recognizing that it's not the whole truth. She said, oh, he has much of it. I'd be dark as a dungeon. It would be dark as a dungeon within me, but for his teaching, right? So she again is recognizing truth. And yet, and then this is interesting. She says, I can't say it properly. So again, this is this idea that when we speak about holy things, that our speech is unclear, right? Because that's just the nature of holy things, right? But she says, I can't say it properly. He calls the whole world a city. But what's a city built on? There's earth beneath and an outside world. Doesn't all the food come from there as well as all the dangers? Things growing and rotting, strengthening and poisoning, things shining wet. In one way, I don't know which way. More like, yes, more like the house of, and Orwell completes that sentence. But she's given providing a metaphor of a city, right? And she's saying, yeah, so if we confine the fox has described our existence or our world as a city. And she said, yes, okay, we can confine our world to that. But we also acknowledge that our world has boundaries. And outside of those boundaries, there's something we don't understand. We can feel its effects. We know it's there, but we don't understand it, right? And so this is what she means that the fox's truth has bounds, has boundaries. And she's recognizing that beyond this very clean philosophical truth, there are things on the edges of our existence, right, that we don't fully understand. All right? And so Orwell goes on to say what she says a lot in this book, which is that, well, yeah, the gods are there, but they are really horrible people. So she says that she's talking about the fox, that, the fox is wrong. Yeah, she says, yeah, there are gods. And she says, he thought there were no gods, or else, the fool, that they were better than men. So the fox is saying, well, if there are gods, then there's better than humans. And she goes on to say, it never entered his mind he was too good. It never entered his mind to believe that the gods are real and viler than the vilest of men. So for Orwell, the gods are vile, just terrible, evil beings. And okay, she has her reasons for this accusation against the gods, right, which she spells out later. Now, but here's Psyche's response. So Psyche then says, or else, said Psyche, they are real gods, but don't really do these things. So Psyche is justifying the gods. And what does she mean by, how is she justifying them? She says, yeah, maybe the gods don't do these things. She said, and the things, so she says, or even, mightn't it be they do these things, the things that we think are vile, okay? So they do things that we think are vile or evil, right? So we're talking about the gods here. So the gods do things that we think are vile or evil, okay? But she says, and the things are not what they seem to be, right? So she's saying, perhaps the actions of the gods are not what they seem to be, right? And this is a point that will come up later. Is this mode of interpreting the actions of the gods. So if you recall at the beginning of this book, Orwell is accusing the gods, right? And I made the point that to accuse someone in a court of law, then you have to have some sort of standing, some sort of justified standing. Okay, and so for Orwell to accuse the gods means that she considers herself properly just. Now, Psyche, on the other hand, seems to have a different approach. She's saying, in the presence of the gods, that maybe we should be humble, okay? And in some way, maybe even recognize that we don't have the answers. So in Orwell's case, Orwell is assuming by accusing the gods and sort of taking them to the court of reason, right? She believes that she can stand over the gods and judge them and tell them that their intentions are wrong and evil and they're bad. And Psyche is saying, no, we don't have that vantage point. Maybe the problem is really our perspective. Okay, so one way to think about this is, so this is an issue of perspective, right? So you can think of taking a walk across a field, and in that walk, it's possible that you've just killed thousands of very tiny organisms as you're stepping across. Maybe you killed a bunch of ants and different things, right? And if someday maybe all the ants of the world rise up against you and take you to court because you're so evil, and you say, why? Like, you kill us all the time, right? And you say, no, I don't. I'll just walk into the store, right? And you don't realize that in your own average activity, you're doing damage to someone else. Then you begin to understand that it's an issue of perspective. From the perspective of the ant or the bug, right? Every time we move or act, it's a very dangerous situation for them. We can crush them, right? But we're not even thinking, that's not our intent. And we're not thinking about that. And in fact, we may love bugs and want to protect them, right? So Psyche here is beginning to recognize that the actions of the gods may not be what they seem, right? That they probably are not trying to do any evil or anything bad to us. It's just a matter of perspective. Yeah. And so this is Psyche's approach to the gods. On page 72, she also makes another comment, which I should sort of write this idea here, which is that Psyche recognizes human limitations, right, in understanding holy things. So on page 72, she says, at the middle of the page, how can I be a ransom for all gloom unless I die? Right? And if I'm to go to the God, of course it must be through death. That way, even what is strangest in the holy saints might be true. Okay, to be eaten and to be married to the God might not be so different. So here, she's pointing out here that there is no contradiction here, right? For the shadow brute to devour her, eat her, and marry her. That it's just the way holy things are. They don't make sense to us. And she says, we don't understand. there must be so much that neither the priest nor the fox knows, right? So she's acknowledging that both faith and reason are limited. Okay, but in her case, she puts more stock in faith because at least faith has recognized that it's dealing with holy things as opposed to reason, I would say, or the philosophy of the fox, which doesn't even recognize that holy things are of a different kind of thing, right? So just to be clear, with the fox, we said the fox, he accepted that there was a divine nature, but he sort of saw it on a spectrum, right? And he thought that maybe the gods were probably better than humans, and it's not that they are better with Psyche and the priest of Undred. It's simply that they're different. The holy things are different. Now, there is another um, part of Psyche's faith that I want to point out. Okay, this is in chapter 10. Okay, and in this case, this is when Psyche and Orwell have sort of reunited, and you know, Orwell is confused. He's trying to figure out, how on earth are you alive? And you were tied to the tree. And Psyche's not completely clear. She says, "Yeah, my hands were free, and I, just was able to, walk away." And then, she's sort of making sense of telling her about the whole situation, her no longer being bound to the tree and being free. And then she says, "And then I saw him." And Psyche says, Orwell says, "What did you see?" And she said, "No, I saw the god." And so she asks Psyche, she says, "Were you awake?" And Psyche says, "Yeah, it wasn't a dream. You can't dream something like this, right?" And she says, so on page 111, she says, oh, it was no dream. One can't dream things like this because one's never seen things like this. So you can't even dream what you haven't conceived. He was in human shape. You wouldn't mistake him for a man, but couldn't mistake him for a man. Oh, sister, you'd understand if you'd seen. How can I make you understand? You've seen leopards, right? So she brings up the example of leopards, okay? And Orwell says, "Well, of course." And then Psyche says, "And you know how healthy people look besides a leper?" And Orwell responds, "You mean healthier, ruddier than ever?" Psyche says, "Yes. Now we, besides the gods, are like leopards besides us," right? And so that is her analogy, that humans next to the gods, okay, are like leopards next to the healthy. So she said, "Do you mean the god was so red?" She laughed and clapped her hands. "Oh, it's no use," she said. "I see I have not given you the idea at all. Never mind. You shall see gods for yourself, Orwell. It must be so. I'll make it so. Somehow there must be a way." And then, so this reminds us of something that Bonaventure says in chapter 7, which is that at the point when you've gotten this encounter with God, it is not something that can be taught. Right? The experience with God is, so in Bonaventure's Journey of the Mind to God, he takes it all the way to that precipice, but says at that point, no one else can teach you. Right? Only the person who is having that experience can understand it, and it cannot be passed on. Right? And this is Psyche's problem. She can't really explain what it means, right, to be next to a god. So she says, there must be a way. Look, this may help you. She said, "When I saw the west wind, I was neither glad nor afraid. I felt ashamed." All right, and what was she ashamed of? She was ashamed of looking mortal, right? And so what we see here is the idea that Psyche, in the presence of the god, recognizes her limitation. So I'll just say in the presence of holy things, okay, recognizes her limitations. All right, and so that's her first instinct, is that when she encounters the gods or holy things, she recognizes her limitations and realizes that you're dealing with a different kind of thing, right? She recognizes the nature of the gods as holy things, right, and does not then presume to understand them. Okay, so in her case, she we so just to summarize this is that she, of course, has faith like Oral in gods, but she has faith in the nature of the gods. That means, like the priest of Under, she recognizes that gods just fall into the category of holy things that don't fall, that cannot easily be defined by philosophy, right? And so things may sound like contradictions, um, but that's perfectly fine when we deal with holy things, right? It doesn't mean you're confused. It just means you can't express what it is you're experiencing. And also, when it comes to the issue of the gods and how they act, she says, unlike Orwell, who thinks she can understand, presumes to think she can understand the gods, Psyche is willing to recognize that the gods are such a nature and they're so great that our perspective is so small compared to theirs, right? And she wouldn't even presume to think that the gods are that we could even interpret the gods' actions, right? And later in the book, we'll see this idea that um, the gods are just so full of life that when they act, things just seem to happen, right? And we tend to love to live in the world of their effects, right? And that's why we think they're doing all these bad things, when in fact they're not, right? They're just simply acting. Just like if you were walking across the street and you stepped on an ant and killed it, you wouldn't even know that. You wouldn't even realize it, right? That's the way the gods are with human beings. All right, so that is the presentation on Psyche and the and how we would characterize her faith.